South Sydney's coach Jason Demetriou has called for the NRL to hand life bans to anyone who racially abuses players. It comes after a teenager was removed for allegedly abusing the Rabbitohs star Latrell Mitchell at half-time during their game against Penrith last night. Police are reviewing footage while the Panthers say they're working with the league to investigate. Demetriou says his club will file a police report and has urged the NRL to do more to stamp out racial abuse against players.
It's not the first time we've come here as a club and our players have been racially abused. Like, where does it end? It's just not on. Now, I shouldn't have to be able to come here as a coach and lead a team of players in here to be racially abused. It's not what our game's about, and we have to stamp it out completely. NRL clubs have to get rid of it. I'm life bans. Anyone wants to make racial abuse, and get them out of the game. We don't want their support. It's got to end.
How's Latrell?
Oh, he's sick of it. Like, why wouldn't he be? Well, he should be able to come here as a star of our game and not be racially abused. Who cares what colour he is? It's just not on. I don't understand how that happens in our day and age. I can't get my head around how a young kid thinks that that's the language to be using. I don't care what jersey he's wearing. Get him out of our game. From what I understand, the security have done a great job identifying who it is. The club's done a great job identifying who it is, and now we'll take it through the police. And we'll go all the way as far as we can with it.
The NRL has released the following statement on behalf of CEO Andrew Abdo. It reads that any form of racism or vilification will not be tolerated in our sport. We will not accept this behaviour from anyone. We're working with the stadium and the club to get all the facts. The Integrity Unit will fully investigate. We stand behind our players, the statement says, and commend them for calling out this behaviour. ABC Sports' Nick Campton says it's important the NRL takes a strong stance.
I would imagine the NRL, based on that statement and based on the words from Jason Demetriou last night, will take the strongest possible stance. I'm expecting a life ban for anybody who is found guilty of racially abusing Latrell Mitchell or any player across the league. I do think the NRL needs to come down as strongly as possible, and that's absolutely the stance I expect them to take.
So you were at the game last night, is that right?
Yes, I was.
Well, how much could you make out of what was happening? I mean, a lot of this took place off camera, off mic, but there seems to have been a bit of commotion there during the time.
Yeah, it was clear that something was happening as the players left the field for half-time. You could see the commotion from the tunnel. Where the press box was, you can't see directly into the tunnel, but you could certainly see something was going on. And then during the half-time break and for the moments after half-time, there was a heavier police presence around the tunnel. And you could see them questioning a few people here and there, and it was clear that something had occurred. And as more details of it came to light, it became clear that it was a racial incident involving Latrell Mitchell, and seeing some of the players, the South Sydney players afterwards, you could tell how much it had sort of impacted them emotionally. And it was very clear from the beginning that this was a serious incident.
And then Jason Demetriou coming out and making that really passionate statement. He really felt very strongly about this, didn't he?
He did. I thought he spoke extremely well on the incident and on Latrell and on what had happened as a whole. And he made some great points about how Latrell shouldn't have to put up with this, and how this has happened to South Sydney before in the past at Penrith, and, you know, how nobody should have to deal with this, and how, while, you know, unless you were Indigenous, perhaps you can't understand what Latrell Mitchell's gone through with these sorts of incidents through his entire life. So I thought Jason Demetriou spoke extremely impressively, and it was good to see that South Sydney will stand behind Latrell Mitchell and they will take this as far as it can. And I think that's something that the whole game can take a good example from at the moment.
At the same time, this has been an issue in the NRL, in Australian sport before. What is the history of incidents like this in the NRL, and why hasn't the dial shifted?
Well, it is disappointing, but there have been several isolated incidents, probably over about the past 5 years. Jason Demetriou mentioned in his presser that it has happened to South Sydney players at Penrith before. Back in 2018, Greg Inglis was racially abused by a spectator in a game against Penrith. A Penrith player himself, Brent Naden, was racially abused in a match against the Warriors in 2020. And Latrell Mitchell has spoken very strongly in the past of receiving abuse from online trolls in 2019 and 2021. In 2019, it almost caused him to walk away from the game, and in 2021, 2 men were charged by police after sending him racial abuse via Instagram. So It is very disappointing that in this day and age something like this can still happen, and no matter how heavily the NRL has come down on those offenders in the past, and I believe that life bans and police charges were issued on several occasions, this still seems to pop up every now and then. And I guess the only way to eradicate it is to continue to come down hard and show that this sort of behaviour is not acceptable in any form of life, any walk of life, and not in rugby league.
There are calls for a life ban. In what circumstances will that be handed out? Who gets to decide, and when does that happen?
I would imagine the NRL Integrity Unit would investigate. I imagine they would be in heavy contact with the police, but I believe the final decision would probably rest with the league CEO, Andrew Abdo. And I couldn't put a time frame on how long the investigation will take, but given the magnitude of the allegations and the high-profile nature of what's happened, I would be surprised if it was. I would be surprised if it was. I wouldn't be surprised, rather, if it was sooner rather than later.
It's a sensitive case too, because potentially here we're dealing with a minor who is the perpetrator of this incident.
Yes, absolutely. I wouldn't want to speculate on that too much because a lot of the details are still coming out. But Jason Demetriou made a good point last night. He's a father himself, and he said that he wouldn't, as a parent, if he saw his any of his children even thinking of speaking in that matter, he would be totally humiliated and ashamed and embarrassed. And I think that's something that we have to look at here. Even if it is a minor, there can be no excuse for this sort of behaviour, and the NRL needs to come down as strongly as possible.
Do we know how Latrell Mitchell is doing after all this?
He declined to speak with media last night. I imagine he'd have to be doing it. He'd have to be doing it pretty tough, I would think. Like, as we said, there have been numerous instances of this happening to him in the past, and as Jason Demetriou said, it's not something Latrell Mitchell should have to deal with. And I think it opens to a wider question of, is this something that could eventually drive Latrell Mitchell away from this sport? You know, there was a very high-profile incident in the AFL a few years ago of sustained racism against Sydney Swans star Adam Goodes, and that ended with the AFL losing one of its greatest ever players, one of its greatest ever ambassadors, and a person of enormous importance and respect in the Indigenous community. And the game was poorer for it, for losing a player and a man like that. And I think that's something that the NRL is desperate to avoid with Latrell Mitchell, because he is a great ambassador for the game, and he is a great ambassador for the Indigenous community, and he is so important to that community with what he does on and off the field, and being someone that an entire Indigenous community can look up to. So I think that would be the greatest thing that the NRL is looking to avoid here, it showing that this sort of behaviour is not acceptable and it will not be tolerated, and it will protect its players from any sort of incident like this.